more on the unrest that we're seeing both in the U.S. and internationally, we want to welcome Brian Hook, the U.S. Special Representative for Iran and Senior Policy Advisor to Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. Brian, thank you for joining us this morning.
Thanks. Good morning.
Good morning to you. We want to talk about your new position, but first let's start with what's going on around the country, including the violence and demands to defund the police. What do you make of what we're seeing in cities like Seattle and Portland, Chicago, and New York?
Well, I try to stay in my lane of foreign policy. The President and the Secretary of State are very focused on ensuring that the arms embargo on Iran does not expire. And so I'm happy to talk about our diplomacy to make sure that the world's leading state sponsor of terrorism is not allowed to freely import and export lethal weapons.
Yes, and, clearly we've seen unrest internationally as well. I want to talk to you about your position. You announced you'll be stepping down from your role at the State Department. Why did you decide that now is the best time for you to step down?
Well, this is the 2-year mark of me serving as the U.S. Special Representative for Iran. Prior to that, I was the Director of Policy Planning at the State Department. So it's been 3.5 years. I've enjoyed every minute. There's no greater honor than serving as a diplomat representing the United States, but I plan to return to the private sector.
All right. The Trump administration has put a lot of pressure on Iran, including economic sanctions, as you know. The president also said he's not looking for regime change. But what path forward is there with a government full of people who openly say that they hate America?
Well, you've illustrated the problem. We have a regime that has been chanting death to America for 41 years, but also death to Israel. This is today still the world's leading state sponsor of terrorism. President Trump has done a fantastic job countering Iran, and they are now facing one of their worst economic crises in their 41-year history. And that's mostly because it's a very corrupt regime that robs from its own people. But our maximum pressure has denied this regime a lot of money that they would otherwise spend on terrorism. The president would like to get to a new deal to replace the failed Iran nuclear deal, but in the meantime, our pressure is working.
I want to turn now to Lebanon. The country's government, including the prime minister, stepping down in wake of what we know the Beirut blast. And as you know, Iran backs the biggest political operation in Lebanon, that being the terror group Hezbollah. Do you think this blast might mean the end of Hezbollah's influence in the country for good?
We certainly hope that for the Lebanese people. In some ways, Hezbollah very much mirrors the Iranian regime. They've impoverished their own people, whether it's the people of Iran or the people of Lebanon. And the people in both of these countries are tired of the violence, they're tired of the corruption, they're tired of the lack of opportunity. And now we're dealing with government incompetence that was not able to prevent this blast. And so Secretary Pompeo has made many trips to Lebanon over the course of his career in public service. He is committed to helping the Lebanese people, and we very much hope that Hezbollah's influence continues to decline.
And as we know, Lebanon, it wasn't the first mysterious explosion that we've seen in the Middle East. It was arguably, though, the biggest. Do you know what is behind the blast? As you know, some have pointed fingers at the U.S. and its main ally in the region, Israel.
There have been a series of incidents in Iran. That really is a question for the Iranian regime because they happened inside their country. I don't have any observations to make on the series of incidents and blasts that have taken place there.
Yeah, and we know an investigation is ongoing in the country. Finally, right. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo issuing a statement saying that Iran is interfering in U.S. elections. Do they want Joe Biden to win?
This regime knows that President Trump has put in place the strategy that has weakened the regime. And it's very much weakened their proxies like Hezbollah, Yemen, and all these Shia militant groups in Iraq and Syria. The regime is much weaker today than when President Trump took office 3.5 years ago. He's had a very remarkable record of standing up to this regime. The regime is not used to being told no. They don't like it. But we have the right policy in place and very much hope that there will be a second term to continue implementing this successful policy.
And Brian, where do you see the future of U.S.-Iran relations heading?
The Iranian people and the American people share a lot of things in common. The Iranian people don't chant death to America. It's the regime. And I very much look forward to a day when the Iranian people have a more representative government. This government represents its own people horribly to the rest of the world. And so you said earlier about regime change. The future of Iran will be decided by the Iranian people. It won't be decided by the United States. But we very much hope for a representative government. And I'm very hopeful about the future peaceful sort of progress between the people of Iran and the people of the United States.
Brian, would there be any indication that there could be some sort of election interference from the Iranian regime come November?
They are very active on social media, and a number of social media platforms have shut down these fake Iranian accounts that are designed to interfere in elections. And so Iran has a very impressive cyber capability. They use it often. They use it, as always, for malign purposes. But we've stood up to it. We've done our best to counter it. We call it out. And we're very pleased that social media companies have done their part to take down these accounts.
Well, we appreciate you joining us live this morning. Brian Hook, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me on.
You got it. You just watched Newsmax TV, America's fastest growing cable news channel, now in more than 70 million homes. You can get Newsmax TV on your cable system or check your cable guide. And if your system doesn't carry Newsmax, call them, tell them you want Newsmax TV, because we're real news for real people.